So last night, season 7 of Arrow came to a close, and that means today we're going to stop and rank all 7 seasons of Arrow from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies and TV way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 7 seasons of Arrow. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Ever since Green Arrow showed up on Smallville, I wanted an Arrow TV show, so I started watching this show night number 1 when it first debuted. I actually tried to watch it beforehand by trying to pirate the pilot before it even debuted. That's how excited I was for this show. But my relationship with the show has been a lot like the relationship between Felicity and Oliver. It started with infatuation, then there was love, then it got awkward, and then we broke up. Now we're back together, and now I'm committed to finishing this show no matter what it takes. Real quick before we get started, people ask me all the time where I get my posters, my Funkos, and what gear I use for my videos. There's a link down below in the description that answers all of those questions to the best of my ability. With that said, let's get started. Coming in last place is season 4. Honestly, there's virtually nothing about this season that I enjoy. It's just a bunch of missteps, poorly executed, and not a single episode that I like to go back and rewatch. Right out of the gate, they'd written themselves into a corner by having Oliver and Felicity run off together at the end of the last season, and so they have to just immediately undo that in the first episode of this season, which seems like, why did we even do that in the first place? Neil McDonough, who plays Damien Dark, is normally great in these types of roles, but for some reason, it just didn't fit the tone of the show Arrow, and it went so far into the magic category that it felt out of place with this particular show and the rules that they'd established for the way they normally function here, as well as just the simple tone of it felt off throughout the entire season. But what killed this season for me is what they did with Felicity. In seasons 1 and 2, she was one of my favorites because she had this quirky sense of humor, was always misspeaking, and then now she's become this self-righteous character that's constantly lecturing Oliver about things. The worst example of this is they had a plotline that could have been interesting about Oliver having a son in the mix, but then even this turns into Felicity lecturing Oliver in a way that just made absolutely no sense in the context of his life and all the transitions that were going on. Thrown in the mix are plot lines about Diggle having an evil brother, Laurel getting killed, and all of it just kind of fell flat. This season fired off a whole lot of plot lines, but every single one of them missed the mark. Coming in at number 6 is season 6, another incredibly frustrating season. Now, this one had some high points for me. I kind of liked the dynamic of Oliver having a son that he's trying to watch while being mayor, while being a superhero. Likewise, seeing Michael Emerson show up on the show as one of the villains, always a nice touch whenever he's added to a show. And as the season went along, I thought the Diaz character got developed really nicely, especially when they gave him his own episode, giving him his backstory. I thought that landed, it worked, and made me much more invested in the character. So the final 5 or so episodes of the season I thought went really well. But then the middle of the season I found basically unwatchable. They had this investigation into Oliver going on. Wild Dog testifies against him, but this turns into a deal where the two sides of Team Arrow start lecturing each other on trust with no recognition of the fact if you're not trustworthy, no one will trust you, and they're just bickering back and forth, leading to the team splitting up in a way that just felt so petty, nonsensical, and not even having a basic understanding of where trust actually comes from, since these people are not trustworthy. Add to that, there's a subplot about Diggle pouting about not getting to be Arrow, and it just is the worst aspects of this show. At the same time, once you kind of cleared out Team Arrow and Oliver was left to his own devices battling Diaz, it got good again, so there was some redeeming qualities here while also having some of the worst stuff this show has ever offered. At number 5 is season 7. It breaks my heart to have this season so low on the list because I loved those first 8 episodes where Oliver was in prison. About 10 years ago, there was a script floating around in Hollywood called Supermax about Green Arrow being in a prison, a Supermax prison, written by David Goyer, and I was very excited to see that movie. Well, it never came to be. until kind of this last season when we got this 8-episode arc, and they even populated it with some great little actors, Vinnie Jones, Michael Jai White returning, that made it this cool little story arc. And while those episodes were going on, I was thinking this was the best season since like season 2 of the show. And then he gets out of prison and it was kind of back to the same stuff that's been frustrating me about this show for quite a while. But the real problem here was Emiko Queen, who I just thought was a horrible villain. They just took the idea of daddy issues to its stupidest possible extreme, because she's a psycho that's killing people and out for revenge against her brother, who didn't know that she existed because her dad was a deadbeat and turned down her business proposal. Yeah, Robert Queen is a scummy guy, but she's a psycho monster. Likewise, the flash forwards kind of spoiled the show for me, because if you show us the future is this dystopian wasteland that's fascistic and everything's kind of falling apart, you kind of spill the beans that Oliver Queen failed at saving the city. And I think they seriously wrote themselves into a corner with all the things that they were trying to do, which led up to the finale, which left me unbelievably unsatisfied, because it felt like the conclusion to almost all of the main plot lines that the show has had about trying to save the city, Felicity and Oliver, him and his family, Team Arrow. All of those are resolved inside of this episode very quickly, and not in a way that felt like we were leading towards that, just because they had to set up the point to where we break off and Oliver leaves, setting up the fact that he's not there in the flash forwards. Likewise, they had to do all of this because that's what they're trying to set up the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which, once again, they undercut resolving all of their most important storylines of the entire series to set up a crossover episode next season. I think they totally botched pretty much everything that they were trying to do. Very heartfelt to have Felicity's last episode. Besides that, I think they totally dropped the ball on what they were trying to do. So while those first 8 episodes, as well as bringing Ernie Hudson into the mix, were an absolute bullseye, the rest of the season really left me disappointed. Coming in at number 4 is season 3. Over the years, I've heard a lot of people hate on this season for a number of reasons, and I've kind of understood where they're coming from, but I've always felt they didn't give the season credit for all the good things that it gave us. Right off the bat, I enjoyed the addition of Ray Palmer into the mix. It's nice to see Brandon Routh kind of show up in things like this. And just the dynamic that he added was a nice little touch inside of the series. Likewise, the idea of the League of Shadows, League of Assassins joining the mix with Ra's al Ghul, that's always a very cool plot line. But on the negative side, this is where the start of most of my big issues with the later seasons of Arrow started. First one is that far too many people are joining Team Arrow and becoming superheroes. So the reason that Oliver Queen was special is that he spent 5 years on an island and then off the island being trained. There's like a 5-year extreme training program for him to become a superhero. Then Laurel takes 2 months of Krav Maga and suddenly she's on the team. And when you do things like that, when anyone can just become a superhero overnight, if everyone can be a superhero, it starts to become meaningless. Beyond that, they broke some of the fundamental dynamics and relationships of the show that I thought made it work really well. A big one being the Oliver Felicity dynamic. Also, by having Oliver with this master plan scheme where he's trying to outthink Ra's al Ghul, gets killed. For the second half of the season, he's checked out, he's injured, he's lying, he's doing all of this stuff where he's not being our hero. So our show lost the dynamic between our fun characters, and we also just lost our hero in general for half of the season. So while there's some things here I really enjoyed, certainly some plot lines, ideas that I think were the right direction, the execution itself, I think, wasn't quite the best. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, be sure to share your ranking down below in the comments section. We're going to disagree. That's the fun part, so don't be weird about it. Let's have a nice, lively, yet respectful conversation. Also, just so you know, I'm putting up a playlist right up here where I'm going to rank the seasons, obviously, of Arrow, then Flash tomorrow, Supergirl next week, maybe Legends of tomorrow, I'm not quite sure, but that'll be in this playlist up here, and those will be coming out over the coming weeks. In third place is season 5, coming off the pretty close to dreadful season 4. They did a pretty massive course correction going into the season with a bunch of new dynamics. You've got Oliver as the mayor, you've got Team Arrow joining the mix, and as Oliver Queen is trying to save his city in a new way and becoming a more peaceful person that's not trying to be so much the vigilante. You bring in a villain into the mix who is the consequence of his more caustic, volatile version of heroism in the earlier seasons, and that's a very cool, interesting dynamic. Now, it did take me a little while to warm up to Team Arrow. First off, because I'm always nervous whenever they add new heroes into the mix. This one, I think they earned it a little bit more by having previously established heroes joining the team rather than taking random people on the show and promoting them to superheroes at random. And I know a lot of people loved Prometheus as a villain and the performance and everything. It always struck me as a little bit hammy. And I think that the idea of the villain is better than the specific execution where he's supposed to be this mastermind that's outthinking everyone. It always felt to me that they did screenwriter trickery more so than actually showing us how he's smarter than them. And so I've never thought of Prometheus as one of the best villains of the show. But in general, still, this is one of the stronger seasons where they were able to kind of do a pretty big course correction. It is the best season of the latter half of the series. As we go to my top two, they're tied for me. I honestly probably like them about equal. And so if you get mad at me for which one I put over the other one, okay, I agree with you. They're both awesome. Our runner-up is season 2. This is like classic Arrow, full steam ahead. All of the pieces are in place for some great superhero action. At its core is kind of our key trinity of Oliver, Diggle, and Felicity as this simple superhero team out there trying to stop bad guys and save the city. That's when I think the dynamic was the best of the show, when it was just the three of them at its core. Add to that, the dynamic at this point in time between Oliver and Felicity was at its best, where she's this person pining over the superhero with lots of little flirting back and forth, but without having to pay it off, so you get all the good fun side to it without any of the annoying lecture stuff that kind of came later on. Throughout the season, we get some additional superheroes showing up at different times, but the way it plays out, it never feels overcrowded or that we're losing our key dynamic at the core of the show. And then, of course, add to that Deathstroke as the good guy, the friend turned villain, driven mad by the Mirakuru and out for vengeance. It just makes for such a menacing, painful villain as he does the things that he does in the second half of the season when he finally shows up in the city. And along with him, throwing Summer Glau into the mix, I thought was a nice little touch. One of those actresses that I love to see in shows, and she gets to be the evil businesswoman as well as the supervillain towards the end of the season. So all those pieces fit nicely. And for me, this is the season with the best flashbacks where I was actually invested in what was going on the island as much as what was going on in the city. So for me, depending on the week, depending on the day, I can pick season 2 over season 1, but just not today. But coming in first place is season 1. I've said it many times before. I love origin stories. I love seeing the team come together. Our hero putting all the pieces in place to become the person that they're going to be. Stories of becoming are the ones that naturally move me the most. And so I am biased towards enjoying season 1 of Arrow the most, as it is the story of Oliver returning from the island and starting his mission to save the city by going through his list. He's meeting all the people that will become the key characters throughout the show. And so all of those episodes, I just love them, seeing the pieces, the foundation being built. Also, 7 years later, it's easy to forget that Felicity wasn't intended to be a main cast member. She was just a random character sprinkled into some early episodes that just had such good chemistry with Oliver that they're like, yeah, let's bring her back. Let's bring her back. And then by the end of the season, they're like, let's make her part of the team. And it transitioned the direction of the entire series. But the reason that happened was because she was so good on screen with Oliver and earned that place. It was also a much simpler concept for a show earlier on, where it's just one hero, very few people know his secret, with a mission. And then as we go through the season, we realize there's actually two guys with very competing missions. And that leads us to Malcolm Merlin, who is one of the great characters of this show, as he's a true believer in wanting to try and save the city by doing horrible, horrible things, which of course puts him in contrast with Oliver, which throughout the show made for a great great dynamic, and it all started here. For me, this season almost feels like Batman Begins as a full season, and I say that absolutely as a compliment to the season. I love origin stories. I love what they did here. This is the season I've rewatched the most times, so it comes in at number 1. Remember to come back over the next couple weeks as I share my rankings of Flash and Supergirl. Also remember to check out that link down below if you're interested in my posters, Funkos, or what gear I use. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much.